Now, Eskom is being allowed to sidestep sulfur dioxide pollution controls at Kusile Power Station. Has been exempted from the lengthy process to amend its atmospheric emissions license. This will allow it to implement a temporary fix at the power station. But there are concerns this could be detrimental to the health of neighbouring communities. Let's speak now to energy expert Hilton Trollip, a research fellow at the Global Risk Governance Programme. Hilton, good morning and thank you very much for your time. You know, we've been watching this exemption matter very closely on the programme because it's honestly among the first where the state of disaster is being tested as a legislative instrument that must expedite electricity securing processes. It's worked for Eskom. They'll now be able to bring in that 2,100 megawatts within 12 months. Your views on just that?
Good morning, Mfunda. Thanks for inviting me to share my views on this. I just first of all want to talk about the pollutant that is removed by the equipment that now is being bypassed. It's called sulfur dioxide. It comes from a lot of sulfur in the coal that South African power stations use, and it's essentially a poison. It is used in very tiny quantities in, for example, fruit juices. It's used as to preserve them. So you'll see preservative, sulfur dioxide, in tiny quantities. And for many people, even those tiny quantities, if they drink that fruit juice or whatever has got the sulfur dioxide in, they get short of breath and they can't breathe. And I'm going to personalize this because I grew up in Vereeniging, where we were told in primary school that the real special thing about our town was we had 5 power stations around our town, and we had lots of power station children, we called them, in our class. And the personal thing is I really suffered terribly as a child from bronchitis, and to the extent that I was rushed to the Vereniging Hospital because I couldn't breathe and given intravenous adrenaline. Otherwise, I would have died the death of essentially slow drowning because you can't breathe. So that's this pollutant. This is why we install these things on power stations.
Yeah.
And the other point here is no matter if you allow this stuff into the air, a lot of people are okay, but a lot of people aren't. And it's not theoretical that hundreds of people will die as a result of this. I'm not saying, and what Minister Creasy has said, I'm going to read it here. She says, in the light of competing factors, I've been called on to make an extraordinarily difficult decision. So this is terrible. You know, hundreds of people will die, and many more will suffer terrible breathing, lung disease conditions as a result of this decision, and that's a fact. So the question is it right? Is it wrong? Yeah, it's terrible. And I spent my childhood, and I've had lung damage for the rest of my life as a result. But I was one of the lucky ones. In apartheid South Africa in the 60s, I could be rushed to the White Hospital and saved. But around me in the townships of Sebokeng and Sharpeville, where the leading cause of death of children under 5 was respiratory disease caused by coal fumes. So that was the terrible apartheid South Africa. And so yes, now we're in this position where it's an emergency. But I want to point to a couple of other things, and I think it's highly relevant because Barbara Creasy has made she's put in an impossible position. She's already, environmentalism is being attacked from all sides. Gwedi Mantashe says, well, you can breathe, but breathe in darkness. I can tell him now, from my experience, if I have to choose between breathing and putting the light on, I'll choose breath. So it's just the callousness is astounding.
It's honestly an unenviable position that she was placed in, because I remember 2 weeks ago when they had the briefing just to take us through the details, just the regulations. She was emphatic in stating that at no stage will the state of disaster be used to circumvent processes. There will still be a requirement to comply with environmental laws. But this year has been the complete opposite, because here they're exempting Eskom from complying. But there is they need the 2,100 megawatts to at least reduce 2 stages of load shedding. And I really don't know what should have been the right decision to take, but listening to you, it seems, according to you, it was the wrong decision to take.
Well, it's an impossible decision. So I think, you know, and these are the kinds of decisions which are going to, I'm afraid, are being taken more and more in South Africa as we see things falling apart. And that's what we have to look at. I just want to tell you about, so Medupi and Kusile were the two big new power stations built under the ANC government. There was a huge controversy in 2006 whether they should be built or whether we should do other stuff. The World Bank gave South Africa a loan of $3.3 billion US on condition that flue gas desulfurization be installed at both Medupi and Kusile. Medupi doesn't have it, so it's running full tilt. Well, those generators that are working, pumping the sulfur dioxide into the air. They did put it into Kusile, the flue gas desulfurization.
Yes.
But once again, and this isn't something that, you know, Parliament or court say, bring the evidence. It is a fact established in the District Court of Columbia, USA, that the boiler contracts for both Medupi and Kusile were corrupt. And it's also been stated, and this is by Director, and they say, bring your proof, that that affected the quality of construction of those two power stations. In my view, there's no doubt that it affected the quality of construction, including, possibly, I'm not sure, the failure of this flue gas. So what we're sitting with is, you know, we hear this, the hospitals, people die because there's a strike. The railway lines, we can't export our primary export commodities because they don't work, because of corruption. So the economy tanks, the rand goes down. So and this is another example, it's just one of many. Mm-hmm. And it's the poor that suffer. It's, as I was saying, you know, I was white, not rich, in 1965 when I went to hospital, but all the people around me in Sebokeng and Sharpeville, and the smoke, you know, the smoke was so terrible, and it's still the case sometimes there, that at 12 noon in the day, you had to put your headlights on. And that was apartheid, but we are now being expected with a kind of gaslighting coming out of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy that we can choose to breathe or have light. I'm so, you know, I get increasingly despondent about this has turned once again into environment versus economics. And South Africa, with its wonderful resources of sun and wind and talented engineers and finance, etc., we can have both. We can have economic growth, jobs, and we can breathe air, and we can have light. But we're being offered Hobson's choice in this case by, I can imagine what happened to Barbara Creasy. You know, it's the kind of analogy of you sort of disagree, but, you know, big talk in public, and then, you know, after that, you know, the bullies in the party take you around the back and explain the reality of your situation to you. And then the next thing you toe the line, otherwise you're out. And I feel, I mean, she's done a lot of good stuff for environment, but it's against this horrible other narrative that's being promoted of it's either the economy or it's the environment.
But it's not really coming from politicians alone.
Out of date.
Is it not also us, society, that we are the ones, there would be those that would say, no, what was the state of disaster for, if not to expedite the processes? We want those 2 stages of load shedding brought down, so assist Eskom. Because there were many that were watching this particular matter with great interest to see how they would decide in this matter. And for them, they would say, if Minister Creasy would not accede to this demand, then it would show that they're not interested in actually resolving the Eskom problem or the energy problem. So one wonders if it's just politicians or it's even us as society that need to have the conversation that what exactly do we want? Do we want them to circumvent processes that will harm us in future insofar as our environment is concerned, or we want lights?
So I think that what I'd like to see coming from the Department of Forestries, DFFE and Environment, I'd like if because of the disaster they're forced into this and the realities of politics in the ANC, I would like to see a study that comes out from the government saying, yes, we took this decision, these are the economic benefits, they can be calculated, and they are calculated. This is the loss of load that was avoided. So there's this cost load shedding. This is what was avoided. And this is the estimate of the number of lives, the hospital costs of all the people with lung diseases, the long-term damages to health. So at least we've got the facts on the table. Because what I'm worried about is, you know, they say in war, the first casualty is the truth. I think in this kind of emergency or disaster, what I'm really worried about is that, and I've seen this already, coming out of, you know, this electricity minister, I looked, his PhD is actually, he's got a PhD in public affairs. And you know what that is? Public affairs is like PR for corporates. So he's an expert, essentially, in messaging, not electricity. And he's admitted that on TV. He said, I don't really know about electricity. I'm a civil engineer. He's an expert in what I call propaganda. And so we want the government we don't, as society, we want to still, even if it's terrible, we want the facts on the table. But then there's another thing. Getting over load shedding, the only thing wasn't to do things like rush this Kusile repair. There were other things. And amongst the most important that is highlighted by independent analysts, all of them, they say we've got to get new capacity onto the grid via the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy's Independent Power Producer Program. But that thing is stalled. It's dead in the water. It's failing. And we don't hear anybody rushing that through, because the dominant narrative now has been this pro-coal, anti-renewables, etc., and the poor suffer, and in the end the economy, because they can fix Kusile. But if we don't put a lot of new power, wind power, onto the grid via the IPP, then in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, when the exemption expires for Kusile, and if they haven't managed to fix that big tower, then there'll be a new exemption, and there'll be another 400 people that die in the next year. And so basically our society gets hijacked by the disaster and the emergency and this pro-coal lobby basically undermining a hard-won environmental rights, democratic rights, and our democracy itself.
Mr. Trollip, a very scary picture that you paint there, but thank you very much for your time this morning. That was energy expert Hilton Trollip. He's a research fellow at the Global Risk Governance Program at UCT.